Welcome to The Owl Hoot, a podcast for the environmentally curious, with me, Caroline Norbury. On each episode, I chat with a guest who contributes in some way to protecting the planet on matters of climate change, sustainability, biodiversity, and pollution. Here is a place where you can gain new knowledge and be inspired. Enjoy listening. Today, I have two guests on the podcast, Jamie and Lor Bird. Jamie is a lecturer and researcher in the School of Psychology at the University of Derby. His professional interests include domestic violence and abuse and arts-based research methods. Lor is an award-winning freelance artist and a qualified tutor with much experience in delivering workshops. In seeking to address climate change, they became members of the Derby Climate Coalition. Together, they advocate using art to express and deal with the emotional response to the climate crisis. I am keen to discover more about them and their climate-related activities. So welcome Jamie and Lor to the podcast.
Hello.
Hiya.
So thanks for spending some time with me this morning. I'd like to start with just getting a feel where both of you became aware of the climate crisis, how that kind of arrived in your lives. What was the story behind that? So perhaps, Jamie, if you want to start with that question about how you arrived at some knowledge on the climate crisis.
I think for me, think about it in a contemporary sense over the last few years, I think probably 2019, becoming really starkly aware of its impact upon me emotionally. I think that was, give credit to Extinction Rebellion and what they were doing in April that year. I think like a lot of people being aware of kind of climate and environmental breakdown over the last few decades, and sometimes that was very present, sometimes not, or other things took more importance in my life. But I think over the last 3 years, and particularly that kind of sense in 2019 is just becoming more and more shocked and disturbed, anxious, fearful, depressed about it. So there's a real kind of bubble of kind of a good few months of just not being able to sleep properly and really trying to get my head around kind of I think the science of it, kind of the reality of that at that particular moment. So I think for me that was a real kind of turning point emotionally for what I've done since then.
Up until that point, I wonder, had you always been aware that there is some changes going on? How did they sit with you? Were you kind of aware that it was a bit like hearing something on a regular basis on the news, but you weren't really tuning into it, or were you aware of it but hadn't attached that emotion to it?
I think there's this really strange memory I have of kind of when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and this is like the late 80s, having a real, and I don't know what I'd been reading or looking at, but a real sense. And I remember saying, we've got 50 years left of kind of like a stable civilization. So I must have been exposed to something then, and then kind of over the years just getting kind of caught up with other things of just being an adult, being a parent, working, etc. That that was in my mind, but it wasn't like, I've got to do something about that, bizarrely. But it's kind of, there was, I think like a lot of people, there was a lost 30 years. And I can see that in my own life, there was a lost 30 years. Then it was going on, but other stuff took over.
Yeah, I absolutely resonate with that, in that it was kind of going on in my own life, but I hadn't really applied any sort of importance or critical, hang on, this is something I need to think about more. Lor, what was it, similar to you or a different type of experience?
No, very much the same. I remember when I had my first daughter using cloth nappies rather than, just buying in, because I knew that obviously the disposables were causing a problem. Being a member of Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, but just thinking, it's okay, they will take care of it. Very much that was my attitude. It's like there's adults there that can deal with this, so I can just donate my money. I can do little bits myself, like, for example, using the not using disposables. And that was interesting. In the late 90s, it wasn't easy finding anybody that knew how to fold nappies and stuff. So I sort of I was very lucky. I had a midwife that showed me a special way to do it for a newborn, and that was more by luck. And sort of those kind of things were important to me. So sort of environmental stuff, very small scale. And then, as Jamie says, it wasn't really until I think 2019, just I think I was reading a tweet which was in reference to the IPCC report, and I was just, oh my God, I didn't realize it was that bad. So there was obviously the Paris Agreement, and you could, sort of tuned in a little bit with that. But again, that same attitude, oh, the adults are dealing with this. I don't need to worry about this because, we've got things being agreed, so things will get better. So yes, it was the shock, I think, of realizing actually no, it isn't, people aren't properly addressing this, and just realizing I've been quite ignorant. But as Jamie says, other things happening in your life, and you're concerned with those things, and then just waking up and realizing, no, this is really serious, and we need to take this very much seriously. And like Jamie says about XR, raising that, credit to them for doing that.
And in that sort of year, that 2019, I mean, Jamie, you spoke about quite an emotional response there. How did you then deal with that emotional response, that sort of, oh no, this is hideous, and it made you feel quite negative about the world by the sounds of it?
I mean, yeah, the chronology of that is, I think if you kind of frame it as a whole, looking back, it was like, yeah, just joining up with other people, like-minded people. And particularly another group I'd give it credit to is the Climate Psychology Alliance, that I think I kind of became aware of quite quickly just because of my background as an art therapist. So picking up those kinds of messages, got drawn to, okay, probably via the internet somehow, okay, who else is, thinking about this on an emotional level, and the CPA Climate Psychology Alliance, yeah, they've been doing this work for 10, 15 years. They've really led the way. So kind of joining up with them was helpful to get a sense of community. I went to an art therapy conference in London, and I was really inspired by hearing from people who had set up art therapy in response to the Grenfell Tower fire, and another group that had set up art therapy in response to the economic crisis in Greece. And what was inspiring is that they just got on and did it. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't seek permission. They just felt moved by their heart and their passion. And I thought, yeah, that's what I need to do, because I kind of have got that understanding of how art therapy works. I've seen it work with people in other times of crisis, whether they're refugees, asylum seekers, people who've experienced domestic violence and abuse. So it's kind of, okay, how can I take all that and transfer it across to this other crisis and this other cause of trauma called climate change, climate crisis? So from all of those, it was like coming together with other people, community, and then translating my fear into action. I'd still say, sitting here 3 years later, I still get filled with a sense of dread and anxiety and despair. That none of that changes or goes away, and I can go right through the rainbow of those emotions within a whole day. They're still there.
Yeah.
But at least I feel I'm with other people, and I'm sure, as Laura say, particularly having Lor and us doing that together has been kind of foundational, I think.
And Lor, because obviously you're both sharing a house together and a family together, did you share a similar sort of negative response? And I don't mean that as in, why did you respond so negatively? A very natural response that, Jamie, were you experiencing at a similar time? I mean, because that can be tricky if you're both sharing family space and you're both thinking, oh my goodness, this is quite difficult. It's better if, in some ways, if one of you is slightly ahead, the other one can support you. But if you're both feeling, gosh, this is really hard, what was that like?
Yeah, because I think I internalized a lot of my fear. I didn't want to sort of let it out, because it just, as Jamie said, it's just so overwhelming, just that sense of existential dread. And then I was sort of doing bits of research and trying to find out, with the IPCC report. And I think Jamie must have got me to read, we must have been discussing it, because he sent me a copy of Jem Bendel's Deep Adaptation for me to get a better understanding of what, the scenario could look like, and then, ways of coping that. And I think we both felt like we needed to connect with other organisations. So for me, I know connecting with local XR group felt very important, not to feel so alone with it all. But yeah, I mean, we did talk, obviously, and we did share responses which we felt were helpful. It never felt that it was difficult to talk to each other, but I guess we both kind of tried to contain some of the extreme feelings we felt and shielded one another from that. Like, I can't remember either of us ever sort of really breaking down in each other's arms in that way, but certainly the frustrations we felt we shared with other people, perhaps, or sort of tried to go through those in separate ways, maybe. But I don't know, does that sound true for you, Jamie, do you think?
I think so, yeah. I think being able to kind of bounce ideas between us and the emotional experience has been really helpful, because I know I've spoken to people where their partner or people around them just don't, they're just in a very different space, and that can be really hard and isolating. So I do feel quite blessed that, I guess, I sort of brought us together in the first place, isn't it? It's obviously kind of resonate with each other emotionally. So yeah, I'm sure we both do kind of protect each other at times, because there's stuff that goes on internal, which I know I probably do catastrophize things at times. So I don't try not to externalize everything that goes on in my heart and my mind, and I'm sure I know Laura does the same. But at the same time, it is good to have someone you can kind of be really bleak with at times too.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and you're right in that having someone very close to you that is pretty much on the same page, I guess, is an advantage. But outside of the two of you, you both share, by the sounds of it, a need to reach out and be part of a wider community. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people do need to be part of a... I mean, I imagine some people don't. They just retreat and try and get under the covers and try to block it all out, and perhaps don't share in that way. But for lots of people, reaching out into a community is a very positive thing. Why do you think that is your experience, and perhaps those of others as well?
Oh, that's a really good question. And perhaps it relates to how you cope generally, or an individual copes in life, that some people will perhaps retreat, as you say, as a way of dealing with it. And there's a certain amount of shock as well, I think, particularly with the IPCC report. For myself personally, just shock of not seeing that coming. And so initially, yes, I probably did retreat a bit, but then coming out of that, it's that sense of like, I'm not alone in all of this, and feeling of being overwhelmed. So maybe people respond differently depending on how they deal with, I suppose, things coming at them in quite a devastating way. People will respond differently. But for me, the community part of it is, it's definitely an essential part of dealing with things. And certainly, like, go back to say deep adaptation, the ideas around that, it's realizing we can't face this as individuals. We've got to come together and see it as a group, as a community.
Okay, and you've sought a wider community to connect with and share experiences. What else have you got out of being within the community? Is it about sharing experiences, or is it more about that in terms of how to deal with it, maybe in an active way?
Yeah, there's definitely practical aspects. So with the Climate Coalition and the Derbyshire Dales Climate Hub that's come out of the Climate Coalition, it is that sense of, well, practically, what can we do to be supportive of each other? But also in terms of, at a local level, are there actions that can be taken to be pushing policy changes? And so collectively moving towards making changes at a local level, or even the idea of having a climate cafe, repair cafes, community gardens. So practical support, again, for adaptation reasons as well as also to try and mitigate and to call for the councils to declare a climate emergency. So yeah, it definitely got the practical part of being a community, that there's more chance of you achieving something by acting with other people than perhaps being just a sole agent.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, community is a space where it kind of escalates action and things that can get done on a more, as you say, on a bigger basis. And it's quite a fun space to be in, isn't it? What part of those communities? Has it been what you thought it was going to be like, being part of Derby Climate Coalition? Has it been a positive experience being able to engage in trying to get things done?
Yeah, definitely. And certainly seeing people that have been involved in climate movements a lot more than I have been, and more engaged with it. So you've got a wealth of resources to draw upon as well, is, I think, really incredibly helpful. So there's a lot that you can gain in terms of like shared experience and understanding.
And what sort of actions you touched upon a number of different types of things there. Are they geared up for local action in terms of getting things done on a local basis, or how much is sort of lobbying and trying to get the political system to change? Or is it just a bit of a mix?
I'd say it's a bit of a mix from what I can see. I mean, like having debate on nuclear, or which is sort of, it's understanding it a lot better, and having different speakers in with experience and insight can be really helpful. But also, as you say, it's been able to lobby, it's been able to affect change. It's also been able to connect with youth movements as well. And so I was certainly with the Derbyshire Dales Climate Hub, as the name suggests, it's a hub. So it's about interlinking other groups around the Derbyshire Dales to each other, so that you're more aware of what's going on. And then you can choose from that what you might want to participate in, or just, as I say, just be aware of what's going on. And then with the hub doing a survey, for example, of Derbyshire Dales residents, also getting an idea of what people actually think locally as well, so that you can see, actually, rather than just guess where people are at or what they're thinking, you actually then have a better idea of knowing.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you found, because you've obviously been with the various groups for quite a while now, are you getting a sense of that more people are tuning in, are understanding the extent of the crisis, and are wanting to be more involved in getting things done?
Yeah, I can see there's kind of definitely kind of growth in different groups. I think I know, going back to the Climate Psychology Alliance, I know that our membership is kind of growing a lot, where kind of more kind of people working in that field of psychology or psychotherapy are really kind of explicitly thinking about climate crisis in the work they do. So that's grown. And I think, yeah, locally with the hub, I think, as Lor says, there's been people that have been working on this for many years that I think provide a foundation, and hopefully it does seem a few more people are coming on board. I think particularly some of the things we're doing over the next couple of months with some climate assemblies and some events around making space for nature is very much geared around public engagement, I think, and kind of trying to bring more people on board with that, but doing that in a kind of making it a safe way for people to get engaged with. And I think that constantly needs kind of tinkering with, really, because we've used the word climate crisis, but not everybody wants to hear that word or use that word, but they might want to think about, okay, how is a changing climate affecting their income or their housing or their transport? And so the hub is kind of trying to work with the council in terms of their public engagement activities and what we can do with that, I think. And then I think there's an emotional component with that, because, is it that some of us don't want to engage with the topic because it is so fearful, or because it's kind of, we haven't got space to think about that. So it'd be interesting to see over the next, with these climate assemblies that we're doing in a public way, does that spark more interest at a very local level around in the kind of Derbyshire Dales, I think, and then help kind of regenerate democracy in some way.
Absolutely. I think you also raise within that an interesting point about language and about the fact that you're reaching out to communities, and lots of people will be at different points, and it's meeting people where they are, isn't it? And that's a tricky business if, as a group, to be able to reach out to lots of different people in different places and find where they're at, and then give them or allow them the space to tell their story as to and help them along with it, isn't it? So it's you've both got great people skills from the kinds of works and things that you've been involved with. I imagine that's really been valuable in being part of these groups and being able to share knowledge and be able to be active. Have you found that it's very much been in your comfort zone being part of these groups, or has it been quite challenging?
I think reasonably, I speak for myself in my comfort zone, because I think I have, kind of art therapy, if I think about, is built on this idea of comfort with mess and comfort with not knowing and comfort with confusion and kind of stuff around active listening. So I have been able to kind of transfer quite a bit of that across to whether that's working kind of within groups with other activists and kind of some of the kind of highs and lows that come with that, but also particularly when working with people who aren't activists and kind of just kind of being there and listening to whatever comes up for them, their kind of concerns or thoughts or whatever that might be. Doesn't mean to say that I don't, particularly when it comes to activism, because there can be a lot of strong feelings, and I get it myself, of feeling frustrated or kind of angry at other people for not seeing it the way I want them to see it, and then just trying to remember, have some humility there, that this is about trying to listen and build bridges, but I have to constantly remind myself to be humble. I'm just a human being who's not very humble at times. So. But I like to think that there's kind of this big kind of experience and skills of being an art therapist does help me, does ground me in comfort in that, and not to respond rather than react.
For sure.
And I'm sure Lor's got something to say about that.
Yeah, it does help. I think we're both very, I suppose we're both quite natural listeners, and it's important to start with where people are at rather than where you think people should be. And that's a really important distinction to be mindful when you're engaging with people on climate, and then to try and take as many people as you can with you. But that also runs into issues sometimes about principle and pragmatism and where you sit with all of that. It's not always easy. And as Jamie says, I think we with his inspiration being just getting out there with the groups, the workshops we've done with Grenfell Towers, and just seeing there's a need, because you can see a lot of people are just literally quite emotionally spent with the activism, and you can see sometimes that can lead to perhaps people getting very frustrated and exasperated, particularly when politically things seem to be going in the opposite direction or quite slow. So again, when we've worked with the council, it's remembering how far the council have shifted in their position, and just keeping on really. And it does feel Sisyphean. There's no doubt about it, that boulder's going to come rolling back down again, and you're going to have to push it back up the hill again.
Well, I appreciate your honesty in expressing what the experience has been like for you, and your, how you've dealt with it. You both touched on there the art therapy. Tell me a bit more about that. What is art therapy, and how does it help with this particular area?
Should I start with that, Lor?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, I think what art therapy is drawing upon is the idea that a lot of the time it's easier to express kind of complicated, difficult, unknown thoughts and feelings in a non-verbal way. So I kind of use, art therapy as in kind of visual means of doing that, but you can do that through music or dance or drama or any of the art forms or creative writing. It's just acknowledging that, if we just approach things using kind of spoken word and cognition, that's good, but that only takes us so far, and that there's a lot of stuff going on inside us that isn't always apparent or on the surface, but is obviously having a huge, massive impact upon kind of daily lives and our relationships. And you can see that happening not only in individuals, but groups, families, communities, society. You know, if we just kind of approach things in a rational way and only a rational way, kind of leads to a kind of, there's a whole part of kind of being alive that's missing. So bringing in arts and creativity and imagination into thinking about the past, the present, and the future, I think, and that's particularly what we try to bring as well, is how can we use art therapy and imagination and creativity to not only consider the past and the present, but make a space for approaching the future in a kind of non-rational way as well as a rational way. And as I say, there's a lot about art therapy that is about just kind of being playful and making a mess. It really isn't about the end product and producing nice pictures or nice bits of music other people can listen to and go, oh, that's nice, or I'll have that on the wall. A lot of it is just about kind of pure expression. And so does that help?
Absolutely.
Like, yeah.
Because you've shared there that it is not, you're not trying to produce a masterpiece.
No.
And that it makes it sound that it can be accessible to everyone. Because I imagine that some people might go, oh, I couldn't do art therapy.
No.
I can't draw anything.
Yeah.
What's your experience of people that don't see themselves as necessarily creative or artistic in that way? Have you had experience of them coming to the table and sharing their feelings? What's that like?
I'll pass this over to Lor, because Lor's been brilliant at coming up with some ideas and techniques for kind of bringing people in with using particular materials in a particular way, which I think kind of speaks to that really well.
Yeah, because when I've been teaching people, you can have a range of people that are just beginners, particularly when I've taught in art groups, and then you can have people that are very experienced. And I do teach technique, but what I am most about teaching is tapping into your own intuition and tapping into your own ability as an artist and finding your voice, which can be quite scary for people that are just expecting a kind of a join the dots approach to teaching, sort of paint by numbers. I don't teach like that at all. So I have a number of techniques that I use to try and encourage people to free up and be more playful in their approach, and to experiment. And I find that those techniques, they do tend to work once people have gotten over their reservations and most of all the internal critic of you can't paint or you can't do this, or just silence them. And once you get people into mark making, just simply enjoying mark making, you're kind of 50% there. So it's just getting people over their initial fears. And I remember we did one workshop for the Centre for Alternative Technology, and we did this workshop online. And there was a couple of people, there were students there who were engineers, and this way of approaching things was completely out of the box for them. And initially they had got the reservations. Oh, I can't do it. I don't think like this. And by the end, but I remember one chap, and he said, whilst I was doing this, I realised I've come around at a different solution. And actually, this is really invaluable way to problem solve. Fantastic feedback, because it literally is, it's allowing a different part of your mind to engage with the process and an understanding. So from that point of view, it was very useful to hear that. But from another point of view, when we talk to people, because we do a lot of reflection during the activities, it's quite enriching, because you can see people are starting to hear a different point of view that they perhaps weren't even aware that they had, or a different approach, or hearing other people's points of view. So it's really expansive. So you're going from a position perhaps of feeling very nervous, or not necessarily nervous because you're doing something creative, although that is often the case, but because you're coming from a position of being very anxious about the climate, actually starting to explore other feelings or other thoughts you might not have considered, or other things. So there was one lady I remember was really worried about Brexit and the impact for her, because she was not originally from the UK and very concerned about how it'd impact for her. That came up very strongly in what she was creating. So it allows a tool that creates a different conversation to emerge, if you're willing to let go. And most people are. I'm always surprised at the brave, well, not bravery, that's not the right word, but people's willingness to engage in experiments. It's always fantastic to see and to learn from other people in that way. And it also gives me and Jamie another avenue of conversation as well, to understand our own feelings about climate too.
Absolutely. I love the fact that not only is it allowing people to express their feelings, but it also it's giving them another skill, isn't it, that they can use in anything and everything, and discover new ways of looking at the world, which can never be a bad thing, can it? That doesn't seem to be, it doesn't seem to be a downside of art therapy. Is there? Do you get some people come in with the expectation it's going to do this for me, and they become disappointed because it hasn't met perhaps an unrealistic or, a different expectation?
Don't know if we've experienced that so much, because I think we kind of try to kind of frame it really kind of clearly before people arrive and during, that it's not necessarily about kind of something deep in terms of psychotherapy in that moment, but it might be therapeutic for the group, and what we're going to cover. And it's not about, we try and say this isn't necessarily about coming up with kind of concrete material actions about change. It might do, but it's more about kind of processing those kind of feelings or emotions, and what that might mean for the future. That might be an outcome of it. I would say there's probably more dissatisfaction when they realize sometimes the material we're using, because what Lor didn't say that she introduced, which was brilliant, is that a lot of the time we used recycled packaging material for people to work with, or just kind of really basic kind of greys and black charcoal. So I think particularly people who have had experience of kind of being an artist or creative, they're kind of like, what is all this junk and rubbish and trash? And we often don't bring scissors or sellotape or glue. So what that means is people really have to use their imagination and creativity. How do you take apart this packaging? Because a lot of packaging is really sophisticated in how it's put together. And it's amazing what you can extract, pieces of metal, pieces of plastic, pieces of material. So there will often be frustration about that. But I think when people are able to move through that and kind of say, oh yeah, there is a lot of creativity in this stuff that previously we saw as junk and rubbish and trash, has got a lot of, can be regenerated and reused. And I think we often see that, and explicitly you'd say, well, isn't that just a useful metaphor for where we are as a society, that rather than all this stuff being thrown away, or that there are feelings that we can just see as rubbish and push to the margins or let someone else deal with, no, we can take it on board. And we've been very influenced, I think, by the work of Vanessa Andrietti, who talks about this idea of composting, about how do we compost our feelings and our emotions and our politics in a way. And it's kind of, okay, it's doing that with art materials as well. How do we take stuff that is usually seen as something to discard and not of any value? How can we see that as useful? And I see that the same as feeling. So when we're feeling guilty or angry or rageful or whatever, rather than seeing that as kind of rubbish that we want to get rid of, how can we compost it and kind of make use of that?
Yeah, we've created our own waste management system.
Yeah.
I love it. It's a great metaphor for, I'm blown away by the fact that you've drawn on things environmental into your therapy, into your art therapy. That's great. But also this idea of using it on your feelings. So how does that work? How do you compost your feelings in practice?
Well, again, I think that one of the powerful things of composting is doing it with other people. I think it's kind of really hard to do it on your own. I mean, if you've got one other person around you, that's helpful if they're on the same, if they're resonating with you. But I think kind of doing it together, it feels like if you think about a compost bin, the compost bin works not just because you've got one worm, but because you've got hundreds, thousands of worms. So it feels like in a group we kind of I do think more and more it's just about doing it collectively, really, that you can recognize that this feeling of dread or anxiety, if it's just you, if you're just feeling it's you, then that is really isolating. You are feeling like, what do I do with that? But as soon as you can share that with other people, you can kind of normalize it and make sense of it, and then digest it, process it, turn it into something new and different, it's doing it with other people, I think. I don't know, what do you think, Laura?
No, I think you're right. And also, I mean, we have had, I think, one or two people that, just going back to your question a bit ago, Caroline, we have had a couple of people that have perhaps been reserved and stayed quite reserved, and that's okay as well. It's and especially when we've done it for the Centre for Alternative Technology, because they're MSc students and not all of them perhaps do want to engage with it, and we always make it very clear to people that, you know, if the exercise doesn't work for you, it's okay. You don't have to reflect either. You don't have to comment, because it's also about respecting people's boundaries as well, so that people actually do feel safe within the group. That's the key component as well, I'd say. And it is like Jamie says, it is going on a journey when we do the workshops of starting off as an individual doing the mark making, and then moving into, by the end of it, we're creating a group sculpture. So it is sharing and allowing that space of sharing to be healing as well, and not getting precious about your individual creation and letting go of that. And I suppose with the materials as well, they allow that to happen in quite an organic way.
It sounds like a really lovely, positive experience to go through. Do you find on the back of that, people are coming to work out their own place and their own feelings, and then within this community, do people then go on to become more active? I'm not saying they should, but in managing those emotions, does it then help them to think, well, what can I do? Or is it just a place for dealing with where they're at?
I think the work we've done recently at ArtCore, we had an explicit focus which was about feeding information back to the council, and it was very important that the people we were working with knew that any comments that they made would be kept anonymous, so that they could freely speak their minds on how they would like to see the council respond to the climate, and how they'd like to see Derby look in future. And there's a key part there. And that was quite practical, I suppose, in a way, because we're collating information that then could be seen by the council. And we were particularly working with people that might not be your typical climate concerned citizens, I guess. We were working with people with disabilities, for example. So it was, again, that's why it's so important for it to be anonymised as well. So identity was protected. But again, where climate might not be the top concern for them, but how it was impacting upon them individually, as well as, you know, they share the feelings as a group too, and reflect on each other's thoughts as well. But again, how they would like to see the council respond. So that felt quite powerful work to be doing, because you could see a direct impact, like a direct output.
Yeah. Well, it sounds fascinating, and the way you operate together and within all these different communities, you're clearly very collaborative and can see the benefit of this collaboration. It's fantastic. Where do you hope to go on from here? Do you make plans about what the future looks like?
Yeah, we have got plans, and that is to kind of expand what we're doing and take what we're doing and just make it more available, and in a way that more people can be involved, and so it's more diverse. And I think as kind of Lor started that then in terms of thinking about, so ArtCore is a community arts organisation in Derby, and it's been going for a good couple of decades, and it's got great reach into, you know, Derby City is quite, you know, Derby City is quite a diverse city in a way, but it's also, like a lot of cities, it can be quite you know, there's not always a crossover between where the power is and kind of people that would, you know, might not have access to that power, or are more marginalized because of issues around kind of economics, or kind of race and kind of culture and ethnicity, and how that works. So I think we're really keen to take what we're doing here and make it available for, you know, those, like Lor says, those communities that aren't always represented within environmental groups. Environmental groups are predominantly middle class and predominantly white, and I think you should always speak about this now, because I think, was it Greenpeace yesterday came out with saying, yeah, really acknowledging that. And I think we have really, like a lot of people over the last few years, really started to see that climate justice and social justice are exactly the same thing. They're not two separate things, but you do need to do a lot of work. And I'll just speak for myself, really try to do a lot of work on my own sense of, whiteness. And that's kind of ongoing, and seeing how that, how I've been brought up, my own biases, and then trying to kind of learn from that about, knowing when I can, hold racist attitudes and racist views, and kind of seeing how, when that gets in the way, and just trying to work through that. And again, lots of other people are doing that. And the Climate Psychology Alliance, again, has done really good work on that. So I think for me, it was, if we can take the work we're doing, and if in a year or 2 years' time, I can see that the people coming to our groups are more representative of the kind of the range of people and the diversity of people that live in our community, particularly, whether that's in kind of Derby particularly, then I think, that would be, we're kind of doing something. But that takes a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work, because there's been a lot of kind of mistrust, I think, between kind of those communities and kind of what has happened in environmental groups. They don't always feel like safe places for everybody.
I think, that's quite right, as you say. That's an issue across the board, bringing all these different issues. They are all interconnected, aren't they? And it's great that you are aware of it and are trying to address it. But as you say, it's not an easy process to bring everyone in. But hats off for you for having that ambition to bring everyone in, because everyone has a voice, and everyone needs to count, and it affects everyone, all of this stuff, doesn't it?
Well, exactly. And you've got to take people with you. And so if people do have reservations, or when it comes down to bread and butter stuff, we are all facing higher energy bills. We need to have better insulation, as you say, Caroline. It's all interrelated. And once you start to explain, climate change isn't some abstract concept. It's having real impacts here and now. And with obviously what's happening globally in Ukraine, those conflicts possibly may get worse. And so that then has an impact upon your heating bills, and it's recognizing that. And so people aren't left behind, and they can join those dots and see. It might have a different perspective to you, but you can at least fill in some of those gaps so that people gain like a little bit more insight and understanding. And with the climate assemblies, again, bringing people in so that they do feel their opinion counts. But I was going to say as well, Jamie's not mentioned, he's got a book coming out which links up domestic violence, his previous research into that, and also with migration and climate crisis. And I think how he's done that, that book's coming out soon, will be really interesting to look at how those things all interlink as well.
Well, that will be an interesting read, I'm sure. So as we wrap up here, because I could talk to you all day, that would be easy, but I'm kind of aware of the time. How are you feeling about the future? That's the question I'm going to end on. Jamie, do you want to start?
Oh man, that's such a big question, isn't it? Yeah. And that depends on where I am each day and parts of the day. I mean, where I am right now with the future is that I think midnight has been and gone. You often hear that thing, we're a few minutes to midnight. I think midnight's been and gone. I think we're living in tomorrow already. We just don't realise it, and that's quite shocking. Remembering that what we've experienced recently in this last week with 40 degrees, many parts of the world, billions of people have been living with that for a long time. So it's not like there is this kind of future for everyone. There's a future that a lot of people already in, and we're all, let's take it the UK, or we're joining that. So whatever that brings, I do know that the only way we're going to either mitigate or just be with that is through a sense of community coming together and building that resistance, resilience, regeneration. And that might be at a really local level, just your neighborhood or your town. I've pretty much given up on national politics. I think it just looks like this just kind of performative circus that's let us all down. It's I think the power is outside, but it feels like if there's a future, it will be just kind of doing more and more just at that very local level, and regardless of what happens, I think it'll be that kind of local community that is what we have to fall back on.
Interesting.
Does that kind of answer it? But
absolutely, yeah. Lor, do you want to follow that up?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what Jamie said there, but we've met some amazing individuals, absolutely incredibly talented, innovative minded people that are doing amazing work out there already. And yeah, I can get very downbeat and feel very frustrated, but I can also admire our capacity as humans also to be incredibly innovative and resilient as well. And the best of humanity is when we all come together and we have a communitarian approach to managing our resources. And I think that's the way that things, for me, ideally lie forwards, where we come together and we bring out the best in one another, which is a bit cheesy, I know, but that's what takes me through.
That is such a lovely place to end on, because I think throughout this very honest conversation, community, collaboration, those two things are the theme right through. And I think that's such a positive place to end the conversation on. So thank you both very much for your time this morning.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Really appreciated it.
I want to thank Jamie and Lor for sharing their experiences of climate change so openly and honestly. It's important to recognise that the facts can be difficult to deal with, and it can be frustrating when responses by government are not what we hope them to be. We have agency though. Jamie and Lor demonstrate theirs by uniting with others to share experiences and taking action at a community level. They also have tapped into their professional skills to support others through art therapy, which can provide new ways of thinking and tap into your creative brain. Fascinating. To connect with Jamie and Lor, links can be found in the show notes. I'd like to thank Andy Shaw for audio editing, Jeremy Jones for providing the music, and to you for listening. Don't forget you can follow the podcast to get automatic access to each new episode. And it would be lovely if you could rate, review and share it too. It really helps. The next episode will be coming out in September. So until then, bye for now.